My name's Trevor Dunwoody from Teagasc in Monaghan, and today I'm outlining steps to improve labour efficiency on dairy farms. Speaking to farmers, they would like to have more free time, so it's a valid reason to look at improving labour efficiency on dairy farms. Herd size is anticipated to increase after the abolition of quotas. And the average herd size is expected to increase to around 85 to 90 cows by 2020. With that in mind, we carried out a survey of 30 discussion groups around the country, including 3 in my own area, to establish what the current labour status was on those farms. The survey threw up some very interesting statistics. On average, farmers are working 34 hours per livestock unit and managing 54 livestock units per labour unit, while the most efficient 10% in terms of labour are only working 20 hours per livestock unit and managing 90 livestock units per labour unit. In order to assess where the differences are, we need to look at a number of the farm operations. Firstly, the milking process. The most labour efficient farmers had 7 cows per unit. They also started the milking earlier in the evening, and there was a clear correlation in the survey between the start of the evening milking and the finish time of the working day, which obviously will determine the length of the working day and the number of hours worked per day. The more labour efficient farmers had some technologies in place. As you can see on this slide, this is an example of a collecting yard with a backing gate which can be worked manually from the milking parlour, which means that the farmer does not have to leave the pit of the parlour during the milking process. On calving and calf rearing, these tend to be bulked into the springtime, the very busy springtime. A few technologies in terms of calving have an adequate pre-calving area, so the farmer can have a high proportion of his cows, 10 or 15% of his cows, in a specific area a week or 10 days before calving. Means that if he comes up late at night, early in the morning, he just has to go first to this place to identify and see what's happening with the cows due to calve. Also important to have these areas that can be mechanically cleaned with a farm loader rather than going with the shovel and the wheelbarrow. In terms of calf rearing, the most labour efficient farms, they tended to be group feeding calves as opposed to individually feeding calves. A lot of them had moved to once a day feeding compared with twice a day, and also the most labour efficient farms tended to have their calves at grass at least 1 week earlier than the average farmer. In terms of the breeding management, the most labour efficient farms had a shorter breeding season, about 11 weeks on average, which means that they have a more compact calving season and more compact calf rearing season. In terms of comments from farmers, they indicate that it's nice to have a couple of weeks of a break between the end of the calving and the start of the breeding season. It allows them, first of all, to have a bit of a breather and a bit of a break, and also to put a plan in place to ensure that the breeding season is successful. In terms of the use of contractors then, very important, the most labour efficient farms were using a lot more contractor for silage, both pit and bale silage. And also slurry and fertiliser tended to be contracted out, particularly in the busy spring period between February and June. A lot of the more labour efficient farmers were getting those activities contracted out. Also, contract rearing. I have a couple of clients that are contract rearing out replacement heifers at the moment, and this reduces the number of enterprises and enables them to focus on the dairy herd. One other area, grassland management. The most labour efficient farmers tended to be grazing 3 grazings per paddock during the main grazing season without a strip wire. How they were achieving this was they were grazing the ideal pre-grazing covers, which meant that the cows were cleaning out the paddocks correctly and very little remedial action to be taken subsequently. Also, farm roadways, critical to have a good farm roadway structure, means that cow flow to and from the parlour is very efficient and also reduces the incidence of lameness on those farms. And also a high proportion of those most labour efficient farms had some sort of a farm vehicle, either a quad or a farm jeep to fetch the cows. With regard to outside contracting, I suppose it's not any more expensive, because if you're doing the job yourself, first of all, you have to have machinery, which is a depreciating asset, and you have to have a man sitting on the machine. So it's probably much easier just to bring in that machinery and the man from outside and get them to complete the work for you at the busy times of the year. So to conclude then, I suppose the survey found that the most efficient farmers are managing 90 livestock units compared with 54 on average. As herd size increases, it will be important to improve labour efficiency on farm to manage these extra cows. The survey indicated that there was differences in milking process, calving and calf rearing processes, breeding management and grassland management, and also the most labour efficient farmers had very good use of contractors in order to get the farm work completed.